Medicine, brought to you by Conscious Living Network and Conscious Living Radio. If you're watching this live on our social media channels, welcome. And if you're watching this after the fact or listening to it on the radio, you may be listening to 100.5 FM CFRO in Vancouver, where we air every Wednesday night at 6 o'clock. Today, I am really happy to introduce our guest. And our guest is a guide, author, educator, researcher, facilitator, Jahan Khamsehzadeh. He's a PhD, and we're going to talk today about his most recent book, which was his dissertation that has recently been published, and it's called The Psilocybin Connection, Psychedelics, the Transformation of Consciousness and Evolution of the Planet, an Integral Approach. Jahan has earned his doctorate in the Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness program at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco. He also received his master's in Consciousness and Transformative Studies from John F. Kennedy University and his bachelor's from the University of Arizona with a major in philosophy and minors in physics, psychology, and mathematics. And with the work that he's done and the research he's put together within the Psilocybin Connection, it's just a really fantastic read. But before we take a deep dive into that, I want to say hello to Jahan and say thank you for joining us here.
You know, it's an honor to be here. Thank you, Mark. And I see Melissa over here. Thanks for coming also.
Well, we're really happy to have you. And where I really want to start, where I always like to start with everyone, is really about your story and what got you into, psychedelics. You're definitely well educated, and it explains why your book is so thorough in so many areas. But maybe you can tell us about your story and how you got interested in the field of psilocybin, psychedelics, and consciousness.
Totally good. Yeah, definitely. As I mentioned in the book, my parents were both kind of immigrants, and that created a kind of, a difficult, painful household growing up to the point where by the time I was 15, I was suicidal, atheist, depressed. And when I was 18, I went to go see my favorite band Tool play. And on the way to the concert, somebody I just met that day gave me a handful of mushrooms. I just took them, thought I was going to have a really good experience. And little did I know I was going to have this boundary dissolving experience, dissolving the boundary between me and the universe. This voice arose in my consciousness who seemed to be at the time intuitively God, something I thought was impossible. I asked, is this real? The voice said yes. I just broke down crying. And that lasted for about 90 minutes. It said that we are love primarily. And after that, we are also, the next important value is learning. And that's the purpose here for us on this planet, is love and learning. And I really kind of began to crystallize those values over the next 20 years. That was my primary focus. And so I went to 20 years of upper education, all the way working, got my master's in consciousness and then the doctorate, so on. And as I got towards the end, all while doing every kind of transformative modality I could come across, from yoga to meditation, different kinds of therapies. And it became more and more clear that the most transformative experiences I've had in my life were those of psychedelics, right? Nothing creates that level of acceleration of growth, coming to a realization of knowing yourself and reality, pretty much within just a few hours. What sometimes might take a decade, if ever even possible, might happen in a day. And so I felt the best way to spend this life was to devote myself, in the purpose of gaining more and giving more awareness and education around these, and also holding space around it. And so then I went to many different multi-year trainings in the field of psychedelics, working within the Mazatec mushroom tradition, getting trained in Hakomi somatic psychotherapy, assisting at the CIS training, and now helping out in 2 different trainings. For myself, I see it as the medicine that is most helpful for our humanity at this time. And even a step deeper, I think we're out of balance within this planet, within ourselves, because we haven't been utilizing these medicines that have been growing on this planet, it seems, for at least maybe 67 million years.
Wow. And I found it fascinating how, you talk about those millions of years, how you really talk about evolution and the role of psychedelics, but specifically psilocybin has in regards to our evolution. And I found it quite fascinating on many levels when you talked about consciousness, for not just for us as human beings or the evolution of the species, but from animals. Now, before we get into that, let's really, you've a master's in consciousness. What is consciousness, and how would you describe that when, because some people will just talk about awareness, but what is consciousness in its entirety, or, in its roots?
Not so long ago, a few months ago, I just looked up the word because it's going to be so ambiguous. And I think in the Webster Dictionary, there's 7 different definitions, right? And so we're using this word to mean many different things. For some people, it can just mean attention. For some people, it means a subjective experience. For some people, there's states of consciousness. So it's the meditation, the psychedelics, normal awareness. And then there's also the sense that there's this larger level of consciousness that unites everything. And you could say God, but there's this field of awareness that everything is connected to. So it really depends at what level of the structure of our evolution we're actually looking at. But one way to describe it seems to be, I think, a deep missing piece in the current dominant paradigm that focuses more on objective reality and material evolution, right? So when we think of evolution, we tend to think of mostly biological evolution, right? The development of species and so on. Evolution, could easily be argued to the Big Bang, right? It's the formation from atoms to molecules to cells to higher level organisms. And I think evolution continues past that, planetary and so on. But it's also the development of experience. As this kept happening, experience became more complexified and deepened, right? All the way, I would say, from atoms to cells and so on, but early animals, from fish to reptiles to amphibians. And also there's been a deepening and a deeper knowing and a deeper sense of identity that's grown. And this continues even in individual development. Within a lifespan, there's a certain level of consciousness you have as a child, as a teen, as an adult, and that can accelerate if you focus more on self-work and awareness. The sense of identity can begin to shift. So as Ken Wilber, the great integral philosopher who studied hundreds of models of development, he says we go from being egocentric to ethnocentric, identifying with the tribe, to world-centric, identifying with the planet and all of life, to cosmocentric, identifying with the entire universe. So we can see the evolutionary process within an individual, also collectively.
Mm-hmm. So how do animals, if we take a look at our human consciousness, take a look at animal consciousness, what's the difference there? Because I know I can speak from my own experience, the experience of psilocybin, and it only makes sense that throughout history, the mushroom was probably, I have to imagine, more plentiful, and the animals are grazing and eating. How do you think that actually affects their consciousness from say a mammalian animal type perspective?
Yeah. There's just seem to be different degrees and depths of consciousness between most animals and us. And that doesn't take away the importance of their experience. Just a side note, I'm vegan, and I went first vegetarian and vegan because of mushrooms. Like, I had a psychedelic experience. The mushrooms are telling me to go vegan 12 years ago, right? So there's a deep care, I think, that establishes an expansion of a heart between us and the rest of life. In terms of animals, 2 books come to mind. There's a book called Animals and Psychedelics by Giorgio Saramani. And there's another book called Intoxication by Ronald K. Siegel. And they both looked at how within the animal kingdom, substances, drugs are used because they're plentiful. They're pretty much in every ecosystem. And Ronald K. Siegel found that about 93% of animals, given the opportunity, will shift their consciousness chemically, right? So this is a normal part of Earth's evolution. It causes not just an expansion potentially, but a breaking of habits. Psychedelics since the 60s have been seen as deconditioning agents. People were no longer following the conventional reality put forward by the government or the Vietnam War. People began to think on themselves. Maybe people know of the MK Ultra experiments with the government and LSD. You couldn't brainwash somebody with psychedelics because they would just be deconditioning whatever was told to them. And so what this does in terms of an evolutionary process, it breaks habits and patterns of behavior across all species, which give the opportunity for new patterns, new behaviors, and new ideas to arise, right? And so with psilocybin, as we've kind of alluded to, there's 200 different species across the world, pretty much most ecosystems, every continent but Antarctica. And I think DMT is found in something about 2,000 plants to different degrees. And then we have a whole host of natural psychedelics. And as what was his name? Richard Doyle wrote in his book, Darwin's Pharmacy, Sex, Plants and the Evolution of the Noosphere. He read thousands of trip reports for this book, and he's a professor at Penn State University. He said that the main psychedelic insight is that the participant realizes they're part of a vast interconnecting living system, and they should be termed ecodelics. So what we have then, putting this into place, is that we have plants around the entire world that increase ecological awareness, creating a greater state of homeostasis so the environment can live in greater harmony. So there's so many ways it would influence animals. Part of it's through intelligence, part of it's through instincts, sexual arousal. There's many adaptive advantages for shifting a state of consciousness for all of us.
Thank you for that great answer. I was kind of curious, how do we see that in terms of, the animal kingdom? And one thing I find interesting, and I'm not necessarily going to say it's, a psychedelic thing necessarily, but just how we see in the evolution of the planet, where we're seeing so many cross species not have the same instincts even to, kill what would naturally be their prey, where they're helping each other out when they see them in distress, which is a whole new way of what we've been taught anyways, of how the animal kingdom works. And, if that's part of it, I don't know, but it's nice to see that when nature does do that, when it would take care of the predator that's after it, or vice versa,
Yeah, I think there's a lot of revisioning we have to do of our identity as humanity and revisioning the way nature works. I think there's at this point a lot of good work put forward that evolutionary primarily moves forward, we can say, through symbiosis, through a sense of interconnection and interdependent relating. It's more cooperation than competition is put forward by so many scientists in the past. It's our ability to be in harmony with the environment that really creates a long-lasting kind of survival for us. And so I think there's many ways this, kind of breaks the bounds between our ego and the environment and each other. Definitely helps do that. I had some journeys where I saw that the mushroom, for example, has been helping species throughout history. And in one of these visions in the journey, I saw deer coming up and eating the mushroom, and it given intuition of which way to move forward, where to bring the next of the herd. And, as Paul Stamets notes, it gives humans sometimes a lot of confidence, but maybe this confidence would also be given to other animals. Which confidence is very helpful, believing in yourself, having less fear. And so I think the general pattern with psychedelics is increases the level of self-organization. So Stanislav Grof, the researcher that's been in the field for about 60 years, worked with 50,000 people in these expanded states. He says psychedelics catalyze what's known as holotropic states of consciousness. States of consciousness organically move towards wholeness, greater level of organization, right? So there's no reason to think that wouldn't be possible for other animals also. And this being said, there's a small part to bring into this, is that we seem to have more serotonin receptors than a lot of the animals, right? So we're more able to take in the psychedelic experience. I believe, and I put in my book, the researchers to the actual papers, but we have 6 times more affinity to psychedelics within our brain than chimpanzees, right? So we're able to get more out of it, but that also means that some time down our evolutionary line, our ancestors probably used a lot more psychedelics regularly. The way animals kind of just find them and eat them, we created rituals, took them more, just more on a regular basis over hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, perhaps grew more receptor sites so we can make more out of this experience than other animals are able to.
There's some great food for thought. Thank you for that. And it makes a lot of sense to me, especially when you speak about the serotonin receptors and things of that nature. So when we look at evolution, we're certainly not using psychedelics in a natural way as you would think of us as, hunter-gatherers back in the day, as, cavemen, or as we're evolving. And I also heard one school of thought one time when, and I can't remember who said it, but talking about the possibility of psilocybin and these spores coming from outer space. Do you give any credence to that possibility, or how that fits into our evolutionary process, or even our own evolution as human beings, with maybe some extraterrestrial help?
Totally. I think it's nice to keep that possibility open and not deciding very strongly in either direction, because we don't know. Right. So I think with a lot of reality, we have to live with some uncertainty and be comfortable with that. There's arguments to be made for it, including that spores can exist, throughout space. The quote that comes to mind a lot, because approaching this very topic, is in and the Psilocybin Growers Guide that was first put forward by Terence and Dennis McKenna. And at the beginning of the book, Terence puts forward this kind of channeling that he had directly from the mushroom. And he's like, I know this might sound crazy. I'm very aware of it, but this is what the mushroom told me. He says that it's a galactic being. Pretty much it floats through other planets. And the spores came from under the planet. And it's a dominant idea within sci-fi, this idea of panspermia, the idea that life really kind of was seeded externally towards our planet to begin to flourish and evolve here, right? And so we may have had life here, but then the psilocybin spores might have came from somewhere else. And there's a structure within the molecule that you don't find anywhere else in nature. And the idea that Terence put forward was that this is a very large mind that we're interacting with. We're used to seeing, kind of this humanoid or kind of bodied animal form, but fungi is a very different kind of structure. It's this large network, normally underground. And the idea is that this entangles all the minds, across civilizations, across the galaxy. The same way people here, where they have unitive experiences with the planet. And it's very common taking high doses where people experience different cultures. I've seen a lot of people see all of a sudden, Aztec aesthetics, or all of a sudden they're in Buddhist temples, things that are normally not a part of the regular awareness. They tap in these cultures. So that probably happened cross-culturally on this planet. Hence like pyramids and so on, and similar art and sacred geometry across all caves everywhere. But the ability that this might eventually happen between us and other species, and the encounter with extraterrestrials and psychedelics is also fairly well known. Terence said once we're ready, the mushroom will tell us how to build spaceships. We're just not there in the point where we're, I would say, ethical enough to really explore that possibility. First, we have to figure out how to live in harmony here. And this way, through symbiotic relationship, we'll take these spores into other planets. So the mushroom can live forever in this kind of like commingled relationship with us and the other species in the galaxy.
Well, I think too, just in hearing what you're sharing and, in reading your book, the way the mycelium works underground and connects pretty much every living thing on the planet, that it would make sense that as it's connected to the earth in such a way that it's also carrying the history and, people say how we carry, even, our own ancestry through our DNA, even if it's emotional trauma and things of that nature. It makes sense that the mushroom and the psilocybin will kind of pass that on, where, especially if you're going to be consuming and picking mushrooms that have grown out in nature, out in the jungle, and has not been harvested under, in a controlled environment, in a lab, or, in somebody's closet or something of that nature. I think that it creates an even more connectedness to Mother Earth.
Mm-hmm. Totally. What comes to mind right now is because it's nice to see it kind of played out in art. And there's two kind of series that really kind of played on this idea. The notable one right now is like Star Trek. For the people who've been seeing Star Trek Discovery, the whole universe is held together by mycelium. It's kind of this mix between, biology and astrophysics, and people are able to move to other parts of the universe and even between universes using spores through the mycelial structure. And the other one that stands out is the movie, the show Sense8 by the Wachowskis, who created The Matrix. And in this, the minds are entangled and connecting through psycelium, which is kind of this psychic mycelium substrate that connects all of us. So there's ways that this is kind of just playing out. But yes, in nature, for example, mycelium interconnects all the roots in an environment, passing electrical signals like our brain does to different parts of itself between plants, sharing information in an environment, along with breaking down body mass, things that have died, breaking it down to create nutrients for all the plants. So it's already sending that information locally, physically. We're just bringing in that there's a depth of dimension of consciousness to this also.
Well, I like that you brought up the Star Trek reference, because I'm not a big Trekkie. So, for those Trekkies out there watching, forgive me. Though what I did find fascinating is when you related to the character of Paul Stamets, and then we're talking about the infiltration of, what psychedelics has done in the pop culture, actually made me want to go and start watching that series. Just the way that you described it in your book, and the way you described it here, because I was not aware. I knew that there was a character that was created, Paul Stamets, for the Star Trek series, but I didn't know it was in that level to how it was connecting the universe. And I think it's a great way to get people to start thinking as these things start becoming reintroduced into society, because the growth of this medicine and the awareness of what it's doing for people, and we're not talking just on the consciousness level, but the healing level for, trauma, depression, addiction, things of that nature, it's showing great results. And as you know, we're seeing how this renaissance is just taking over. When I got involved in 2017, it was big and it was growing, but where it is today, 5 years later, it's incredible to have seen the growth and the way it's been brought on board and recognized by so many, reputable and respected doctors, practitioners, healers, researchers, that, it's something that we really need to pay attention to. Why do you think over the years, we know part of the Spanish Inquisition, why do you think all of this changed and it got so hush-hush? We had the resurgence in the 60s, kind of got it started again, and then it, kind of stopped, and now it's full grown. What do you think's going on societally that way?
Yeah. To answer your question of why it stopped, I think Michael Pollan made a really great analysis that when it came into Western culture, we have no context or container for it, right? So in indigenous traditions that probably use these for thousands of years, there's containers, there's a ceremony, and it's held by elders, and there's a lineage where it's generation to generation, this wisdom is passed. And in terms of integration, it's like the whole society is in the same kind of paradigm, right? And so you have a point where there's no other point in history, as Michael Pollan points out, that the youth had such a searing rites of passage that the prior generation didn't understand. We're going through these huge initiations, sometimes within ourselves, the cosmos, different spiritual realities to really break out of the dominant, at that time, the Christian paradigm and so on, break out of the kind of capitalistic thought that had been there for so long. And so, of course, this was a threat to the existence of that paradigm and to that order of rules. Right. And so that also means it was very frightening for the older generation. Can only imagine being a parent at that time. And all of a sudden your kid is leaving the religion, wants, using like Timothy Leary's thing, like tune in, turn on, drop out. Now, now my kid's going to be a hippie and not work. I mean, it just brought so much frightening. And I think it's a natural tendency for a lot of us of what we don't understand and know, we respond with fear and sometimes aggressively. And so that happened very swiftly. I don't think people that generally had taken the medicines would have ever agreed to make them illegal because they had profound experiences in deep healing. It was the people that hadn't yet tried it. And as Paul and also Stans points out, it's just like by 1965, I think there's like 1,500 scientific papers written on LSD, right? So the science was very conclusive. All that didn't matter. It just shows how quickly we can move out of fear. All that was put out the window. But now we have the backs of those people to stand on. We have decades of use, we have decades of research, and the generation coming in now, and including the people that from the last several, we have more awareness. We're including the indigenous traditions. We know the medical value, and we're less scared because it isn't as new. It's a major thing. Like, I can't think of anything else revolutionary society and culture the way these things can, right? And so the entrance and courtship of this looks like it might have taken like 7 decades, but once this integrates over the next decade or two, it gives me more hope in the future than anything else in every area, for psychology, for economics, for sustainability, for politics, across the board. I think it gives the potential for a deep revolution.
Yeah, and I think, when you talk about, the adaptation through, the economics, government, and regulation and things of that nature, I'd like to think that the plants themselves will, work to keep a level of integrity and sustainability in place, because I know that the people that we work with in the spirit plant medicine world, and when we bring people to, speak at our conference or even have these conversations, it's really a deep acknowledgement of the indigenous history and the natural history, which I think you really outlined quite well. I was able to picture, as I was reading your book and you're talking about evolution and civilization and, a nomadic civilization following the food, not being attached to things, and the naturalness that mushrooms would be out there. And if you're foraging, you start eating things. And if you could, I could just imagine you're just eating because you're hungry. And all of a sudden you start having this experience, and then they got to figure out, what did I eat there? What happened? And then just the evolution of that happened. I found was a fascinating picture that I was creating as I was watching this evolution and then into almost, this civilization when they got into agriculture and things of that nature. And then we see in the 60s, like that natural process, I think, thousands of years ago. Then in the 60s, I think it was almost like kids in a candy store as well, where, what we've learned and the common teachings of any great teacher, facilitator, shaman is about set and setting. And, dosage is always important as well. And in the 60s, I think there was a little bit of a, people just going to town. And, we hear stories of, I think when Paul Stamets tells his original story of how much he ate in his first sitting and, people just not knowing, which brought me back to my question for you. When you went to that concert and you had got some mushrooms from your friend, was that the first time you had experienced psilocybin, or have you experienced it previously?
The first time I tried psilocybin was at age 15. Before alcohol and before pot. It was a class trip, an overnight class trip to go to, I was in theater for a long time, went to Hollywood to see some stuff. And most people were older than me and they all took LSD. And I was just way too scared. Now comes evening around 10 o'clock at night. I feel like I'm the only one missing out. I was like, somebody give me something. Somebody had some mushrooms. And then quite an existential experience. At 15 years old, most of the time for hours, I was sitting there kind of crying. I'm like coming to terms that my parents were going to die sometime. So it's a very heavy experience, and the wall just broke down into matrix code. I mean, it was quite impactful, though not comfortable. So I had already had psilocybin a few times before, but something I think that made that specific trip helpful when I was 18 was, there was about 7 or 8 months before that experience where I was spending 5 hours a day just walking. I was kind of, again, the depression and the deep existential kind of despair. What's the meaning of my life? What's the meaning of humanity? Where did we come from? What is the ego? What is time? And just kind of obsessed with all these, and everything else kind of paled in comparison, everything at school and so on. And so the accumulation of all those deep hours and months of thinking really accumulated. The experience started first of feeling eternal, and then feeling I was about to die, and letting that happen and having this huge expansion. And so I think in this way, I think prep work does a lot. Here it kind of just happened unconsciously because I was kind of following like the cord in my soul towards a direction. But I think in terms of preparation, a lot of the self-work you do before going into a journey allows it to be very beneficial.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, because it's part of the protocol of, you speak to any reputable practitioner in any way that they're doing that, there's a pre-integration and post-integration. And I know how important that is. Could you maybe give our listeners, if they're considering, journeying with psilocybin, some of the things that they should be considering when they decide to go on a journey?
Totally. I think minimum 2 prep sessions before, 2 integration sessions afterwards. And I just alluded, a lot of the work you do beforehand, it's including bringing up material, connecting the dots, everything plays a really good role. It's like bringing out materials to build with almost during the session. And, just to bring it back to what we were saying before, I think that's part of the things that we're missing. We're talking like in the 60s, right? There's no prep, there's no integration, just people having these huge kind of reality shattering experience and then not knowing how to pick up the pieces, right? And there's no support around it. So, here where it's coming into Western culture largely through therapy, there's many ways it could come recreationally, it could come through ceremonial indigenous settings, but it's through therapy. And therapy tends to be very contained and very held with trained practitioners. And so if everything's gone together and the prep is right, as the studies have found, it's very safe. Most across the board, these substances. So like if you know the dosage, where it's coming from. And then on top of that, I'd say the biggest part is creating the sense of safety, which means having an individual that's in integrity working with you, having a deep sense of trust, thinking beforehand. I mean, I'd say talk about all your fears first, just get that off the table. Fear of death, fear I might go crazy. We have fairly common fears across our species, right? And they're all normal. Almost none of them happen, but anytime we're running away from something, it's going to make that thing more charged, right? So really kind of come, even in the prep work, let's confront all of it. Let's be very transparent. Let's come clean. Anything that you might think might go wrong, great. Chances are things are going to go really well. That's really most likely going to happen. I'm not saying it's going to be comfortable. It's just probably going to go very well. Studies show it creates a hyper-connected brain state, grows new neurons, and increases what we know as spinogenesis, the re-enlivening of dendrites, which is correlated with depression. And then the integration, part of it, there's two parts. I think it's partly to harvest from the experience, but it's also there for safety. We don't want unintegrated material. I mean, trauma is unintegrated material, right? Like things can affect us unconsciously if it's not integrated, right? And so if you have a very jarring experience, especially if there's no right setting, meaning you didn't feel safe at some level, you weren't actually safe, or somebody's crossing your boundaries, whatever went there, that can create trauma. And so there's follow-up sessions, just like there is with any like medication. A doctor gives you stuff, he better check up on you, like, how's this going?
Well, and any personal growth. Right? Any personal growth, any personal development. It's not like you just read a book and you're done. You've got to do the work, right? Totally.
For me, the work has been deeply humbling. For about 12 years, I wanted to be a professor. It actually came up in another psilocybin experience at 22. I was tripping at a university like at 10 o'clock at night. And I was like, maybe I'll be a professor. And this voice kind of arose. And she's like, are you going to be serious? Are you going to commit to this? And I was like, yeah, I don't know any more worthy path right now. And that was my trajectory for a dozen years. And it's really towards I finished that and deepened into psychedelics. I felt being a guide and being education through other avenues was more transformative and beneficial. And it's been humbling because, I wanted to be in front of a classroom and teach about cosmology and evolution and consciousness. But where did I learn all this from? I learned a lot from books and people, but it was primarily the psychedelics. Nature teaches us a lot better than other people. I love all the people, but, what comes to mind is that line from Terrence. He says, avoid gurus, follow plants. He's like trying to get enlightened by another person is like a grain of sand trying to get enlightened by another grain of sand when there's the entire beach. I mean, we're talking about nature. It's the entire structure of evolution. It can teach us a lot better than anybody else. So if we create the right setting, the safe space, the nature does the transformation for the person in the deep teaching. And then I'm here to affirm it and give context in the paradigm, because people will be like, oh my God, I just broke into a new worldview. They need somebody there that understands that. That really kind of helps them fill in the pieces and the gap and be like, and not move into self-doubt. It could be so different. Like, was that crazy? Am I going, did I really just talk to a spiritual entity? Am I really loved? You don't want them to lose this amazing, precious experience they have. So you have to sit there and be like, no, this is very real. I've seen hundreds of people go through this. Like it's solid. So, many ways to keep transforming and learning with them. Go ahead.
Yeah. And I think, with integration, community always comes up in a really big way, where we see, you're down in the San Francisco area, I believe. We're up here in the Vancouver area, and there's a really strong, robust community of people who've had the experiences and are here to, guide or help those. Because I know one of the things that we hear often is, people will have an experience, and then they're not able to go talk to their friends, their family, their coworkers, because their world and their community isn't, necessarily privy or supportive of that kind of thing. So I think community with integration is also a really powerful tool where people can share their experiences with each other.
Deeply. That experience I just talked about at the Tool Show happened in 2002. It was Tucson, Arizona. As you're kind of alluding to, I had nobody, right? And so I thought about that experience, every day for 7 years. I've pretty much 20 years later, I'm still thinking about it almost daily because it was so impactful of a shift. But I had to sit with it within myself, and I found affirmations and confirmations normally through books. And why I'm doing the work I do. But the people getting into this today, they have an exploration option that was never available before. Yes, just this online format, worldwide community. Most major cities have some level of psychedelic society, here in the United States. It's only deeply increasing. The amount of books coming out of it is more than ever before.
Well,
We
you've
need
got
reflection.
decriminalization movements that have happened, right? You've got, government agencies, doctors, like there's so much support now more than there ever has in recent times anyways, for these plants, and to recognize them as medicines. I've always believed nature is our best pharmacy. And I had one of my biggest awakening moments through an ancient meditation. And, I don't know how, the stars were aligned, everything was happening for that experience, yet it's not something you can get back to necessarily every day in a meditation. And I found that, in my own work with psychedelics and psilocybin, and what you speak about is, feeling that connectedness and having that mystical experience as referred to many, many times, that is, a common report from people who go on their journey. And I think that says a lot towards the medicine, that there's, as much as there's surprises, there's kind of no surprises as well, because we know that these plants and these fungi have this ability to open up those channels of our own biochemistry, our own biology, so we can have that experience. Because, and so what you were really saying earlier is experience is the best teacher. You can read a ton of books, but it's not necessarily going to give you that experience, but it will give you some book smarts, right? And this one thing I want to say about your book that I really loved was, it felt like I was reading a whole bunch of books at the same time. And it shows your, for me, it showed your passion and the way you've brought so much research together in a way that was readable, was enjoyable, that kept me wanting to turn the page, and touching on so many aspects of life, right into, the social aspects and even the economic aspects when you relate into, the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and what's happening today. I know it's a little bit of a rant there, but maybe could you talk about how you see that psychedelics and these things affecting the economy and what you're referring to in your book that way?
Yeah. As we're kind of saying, that I think one of the main deep experiences of the psychedelic experience is of interconnection, and another way to say it is unity. And there's like a infinite ways to experience unity, that everything is deeply interconnected, including all the domains of our society and ourselves. And about a decade ago, I think 2012, I just became very clear that it was normally the area having to do with economics that's holding back our species and our culture. You can see it across the news, how much it affects when we talk to everything. It just became very clear that the ecological collapse, climate change, the deforestation, the poisoning of the oceans, all the way to animal factory farming, all of it came down to economics. War came down to economics. Slavery came down to economics. Just everything that I felt was going awful on a large scale was somebody's making a profit, right? And then it just became very clear what we need to be talking about, where the energy needs to be. And so I did a very deep dive and have been for a long time on the structure of economics. And right now, the way our economics is based is on a debt-driven system, meaning how does energy or money enter the system? It comes in through debt, right? So every time the Federal Reserve makes money, everybody owes an IOU to it. And when fractional reserve banking, with the way the bank makes money, it does it also through by being borrowed out, and you owe more return, right? So every time money comes in, more money is owed. Right now, there's 3 times more debt in the world than there is money, right? And that's going to continue to accelerate, right? So this creates a deep sense of scarcity that isn't even real. In our reality, it creates more stress. Under stress, people become more selfish. They become more dominant. We go to war. We stop caring about everybody else because we're focused on our self-gain and our self-survival. And this literally has to do with the experience of a lack of energy, which we've created, in terms of the financial system. So just in terms of logic, there's a huge flaw in the economic system in most countries base theirs on what we do here in the US. And so it's not sustainable. It's tearing everything apart. And without that shifting, I don't think we can get sustainable. It's also, I don't think it's sustainable on itself. I think we're seeing that. And so we need an alternative system. And I think blockchain technology, which cryptocurrencies are based from, offer an amazing alternative. I spent in 2017 literally 1,000 hours looking at it because it'd been so many years before I had felt so inspired by understanding a complexity of a new system. It is quite beautiful. I think it'll have a lot of longevity. And just like the adoption of psychedelics, cryptocurrencies, it's going to take a while because it challenges a lot of things. It's hard to adopt something that's so different. With psychedelics, you're asking people to shift in a completely different paradigm. Things that were seen as drugs are now being seen as medicines. They've thought their whole life these things are bad, and it messes everything up, right? And so with cryptocurrencies, I mean, you're attacking, you say, the large powers of the world. I mean, the reason a lot of people have power is how much finances they have, or the way even the governments are built. I mean, it's a threat, right? But it's also freeing to the whole, to have a decentralized, democratic financial system that's transparent and run by protocols we can all see. And so I think it's a necessary major shift. And just like psychedelics, it's going to take a while to adopt because it can look so alien in many ways.
Yeah, well, I love the way you made the comparison to the blockchain and mycelium. How, mycelium is recording everything throughout life and on the planet, and then blockchain is now recording all the transactions and the different things. So even if one gets lost, it's not lost forever because it exists in other nodes and things. I thought that was a great comparison to understand partly how it works and, how it's somewhat related. And then when you go back to that whole Star Trek, traveling the universe through, mycelial webs, it really paints an amazing picture so that we can understand that we're not just this planet, that we are spirit having a human experience where this body is the receiver of all sorts of the great things, and we're only limited by how we actually use it. And it's the one thing I love about the power of the psychedelic medicines is how they can open up the other channels so that we can, have a different perception, a different perspective. And, how you described many times in the book and, throughout my own meditation experience and things is that oneness, how we are all one. We have our own individual consciousness of sorts, and we have the collective consciousness, that there's a balance that we may not understand or see at this level. And then when we wake up to it, to see the interconnectivity between all living things, not just on this planet, but throughout the galaxy and the universe, right?
Mm-hmm. Totally. For me, that's the big mystery. It's the big secret of the cosmos, is that we're all one, right? And it's such a simple statement, and it'll take lifetime, if not more, to really sink into that truth, because it affects and changes everything, just looking at myself in the kind of 20-year trajectory on that, it's easy to grasp intellectually. Your mind can grasp things very fast. Everything's interconnected, ecosystems, so on. We're one. The whole evolutionary story, you can get that. But to change that to our emotional state, to have that deep sense of belonging and empathy and care and connection emotionally to all beings, is really takes a while to work that out. And then I think there's another step almost energetically, to your body can really settle into that kind of state of, I feel a oneness within my being, kind of a wholeness, but I feel energetically in my being, that with everything else, so it's a big thing that I think it takes a long time to chew on. So the transformation with it is infinite. We're talking one with everything. So it's very much, it's going to forever keep evolving. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I really look forward to the future of, humanity, as much as there's a lot of craziness going on in the world today, but this revival of bringing these medicines back to, help people have that realization and really bring them back to nature, bring them back to our true selves or true beingness, versus the conditioning that we've been carrying for, hundreds of years, if not thousands, since, life has been changing. Now, before we get going any further, we like to keep our show about an hour or so, but we do have some guests in our Zoom room here with us. And I wanted to put out an invitation that if anybody has any questions for Jahan, now may be a good time. If you're okay with that, Jahan, we can take some questions from the gallery. Now, there is one requisite. You have to turn your camera on and raise your hand. You can either raise your hand physically so I can see you, or you can raise your digital hand at the bottom of the Zoom window. Does anybody have a question for Jahan in regards to his work? All right. Well, that was easy. If you do, feel free to raise your hand, and we'll come back to you. So now, Jahan,
Carlos
when we
does.
go back,
I don't know if you can see him.
Oh, Carlos, do you have a question, Carlos? Okay.
Yeah.
I'll ask you to unmute here. Go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, it's good to hear you.
We sure can.
Yeah.
Hey, good to hear you talk, Jahan. I've been a fan since you put out the book, and I haven't finished it, but let me see if I can form the question quickly. Have you seen any interesting models on how to bring psychedelic medicine, whether mushrooms or others, to the mainstream? I know some countries are already, doing their little clinics and whatnot, be it ketamine or MDMA. I'm familiar with Field Trip, but have you seen any other models that seem like cool to you, that they have traction around the world?
I think there's so many ways it's coming in society. It's definitely the medical model that's coming in. That'll happen maybe next year with FDA kind of approval. So, being done in clinics. There's the ceremonial one that's happening. Also in the background, there's Michael Pollan says something. There's like 600 ayahuasca ceremonies every weekend just in California. So that's one way it's kind of entering in. There's the recreational kind of like Burning Man has 70,000 people. Largely, a lot of people are taking psychedelics. Terrence McKenna really proposed on his end 5 grams in silent darkness. People are just doing it, growing by themselves. Something I think allows the decriminalization movement of decrim nature is very community based. So if part of the regulations is that you can grow mushrooms, for example, and then share them with your community. So something I would like to see is done in a family setting. I think it's a given for a lot of us that take these. It really helps heal relationships. It creates a sense of oneness with us in nature, but a oneness with the people around us. And I think they could be contextualized and seen as wholesome, again, moving towards wholeness. And so much of trauma and even therapy has to do with work within the family system, because that's what really affected you psychically. It's been an honor. I've held several journeys for my parents, my sister. And so that kind of helps heal this core field that we have inside. So I would really love to see that, because I think it goes even deeper than the personal work is healing the family system. That has, I think it's around the corner as we move step by step, moving towards, for us, it's obvious legitimacy. For other people, they're just becoming aware of that. So I think those are some other models. I think also creativity, the potential for it creating technological breakthroughs is huge. Scientific engineers and also for artists, we see it through all the music. So I think there's going to be places where it's not just for healing, but for creative inspiration. And I think those can give us a lot of the insights for us to, in terms of a visionary way for us to move forward. That's my answer, but happy to expand on anything that comes to your mind.
Well, I just want to say I love that answer, Jahan. And it came up even in a program we did yesterday with some Indigenous folks in regards to what they were doing. And it's really about there's such a loss in the family unit of these rites of passage, whether it be, spiritual, culturally, from boyhood to manhood and girlhood to womanhood. And the importance of that in society and how, especially in our Western culture, we've lost so much of that in this entitled consumeristic drive, where even the family unit. And this is something I thought was really incredible in your book when you're talking about, the nomadic people and the tribal people, when they lived in that way, it was polyamorous, it wasn't monogamous, it was the village that raised the families. There was always these rites of passage and these medicines available in their lives. And we're not seeing that in the family system so much anymore these days. So how would you suggest people start introducing it to their families, or is it just starting with a conversation? Is it how would you navigate that?
Yeah, it's a sure. I feel it's getting easier than ever before. I think it was just last week I saw Michael Pollan's new documentary, How to Change Your Mind, that's on Netflix, with my parents. I mean, amazing conversation starters. I feel the documentary was very well done as his introduction. It was very accessible, I think, for anybody. They brought in great research, and I mean, just opening that dialogue, your parents seeing the research. I think him as a person, Michael Pollan, is very friendly, so that plants the ideas. There's also the point where, depression is a rising epidemic in our country. So it's anxiety. And I see it also a lot with elderly people and growing older, of like, where's my place in the world? Who am I? What's my purpose? Even like the emptiness kind of syndrome. And this is more than anything I've seen very helpful for depression. I mean, the studies show that also 80% successful treatment resistant depression. So if the parents are feeling any kind of ailment, and I think most families are at some degree, there's somebody that has, is emotionally hurting, probably within every family system, it's helpful. Or if there's addiction, there's OCD, just all of it across the board that I think is fairly widespread. So that's another entrance. Microdosing is also practically harmless, easy to kind of adopt and try, because it's so subtle. That's an easy way just to get used to. I mean, the hard part is changing about all this, the stigma, the image, and then people trying something that's unknown to them. And that could be streamlined and lubricated. Once people really see that it works, they're on board. One psychedelic experience with the right set and setting, people are kind of like, wow, like changed, or they see the power and potential of it.
Great answer. Carlos, did you have any other questions to follow up with that, with Jahan?
Thank you, man. Thanks for being here. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, so because we're getting close to our hour, Jahan, and I want to be respectful of your time, of all the work you've done now, on your book, which was your dissertation, and I thank you so much for bringing it to a published works as well, because I just think it's a fantastic read, and anybody interested in learning more, taking a deeper dive, you cover so much in this book, and I encourage anybody and everyone who's interested in learning more, or if it might just be an entry point for you because you're curious and you may know somebody who could use the benefits of these plants. So I just want to put that shout out to your book for one. And what do you see moving forward in the nature of your work and psychedelics?
When I entered this, I mean, maybe, 5-6 years ago, a while back, I mean, I made the commitment to move my dissertation towards this. And at the time, there was a lot less security in the field. As we were talking before this, you started, I think, in 2017, taking over the conference, and it's really kind of expanded. And now there's just so much more security in terms of, and potentials as this keeps unfolding. And so I think there's going to be positions and opportunities that just don't even exist today. But the ones from where I stand now, I'm going to keep doing guide work for sure, keep running retreats. There's a course I was just asked to go down and speak in Santa Cruz in 2 different days. And so I think I'm going to put together a 2-hour just kind of class that I'm going to also do in other places called advanced guide work. A lot of the guide trainings now haven't helped or been part of like maybe 6 is that they focus largely on harm reduction, which is like first step, like safety. Let's keep everybody safe. Like, yes, but I feel there's a very good understanding in my system of what's trying to happen. The self-organizational process, and I've spent about 20 years also studying, transpersonal psychology. There's so many valuable maps, that come from deep experience and exploration that gives a role of the potentials of human development and the ways that it grows. And so I think those are very helpful, especially in psychedelic states. So if we're talking about human development, each stage of development could take years, but in psychedelics, it can really accelerate that process. And so I want to do a level of that training of like, once people have the fundamentals down, here's other things to help, kind of move things forward. The book just also came out in Audible, and I'm glad to do that. And I'll probably write some more books. But given that this one took a few years, I don't mind taking a step back from writing for like a year. I've written 2 articles since then, but like I'm going to take a step back for a little bit, let things settle before, committing to another at least year of writing, because I'm sure it'll take me at least a year for each book.
Well, I look forward to your next book and your future work. And if there's any way we can support you within our community, we're happy to, just send us some information. I'm happy to share. We can do posts anytime you want to, hop on a conversation like this, or maybe do a class for our community or something of that nature. That would be great. And, hopefully we can talk about having you even visit our conference this year in November. Would be great to just have you here as an attendee even, and meet our community up in Vancouver. We've got a very dedicated, heartfelt, consciousness-based community that, covers the gamut. And we're always excited because, the conference is so well received, and it's not just medicinal people and medical people and, dry information and research. It's a mix of, researchers, doctors, practitioners, Indigenous representation, where we have seekers and experts alike. And it's beautiful to watch everybody come together in such a way. And I think it was Mark Hayden once coined us. We're the conference with the ceremonial feel, which is a nice compliment coming from Mark Hayden, because if there's one thing that we've seen is the importance of community and people being able to connect, to talk, to share, and have avenues to be able to do this work in the choice of which they choose, whether it be shamanistic or a clinical type setting or things of that nature. But we like to make sure that we provide the information, the knowledge, and support so that people can make the best decisions for them. So, I look forward to supporting your work in any way that we can moving forward. Anytime you've got something, just feel free to reach out. And before we go, I see Melissa turned on her camera. Melissa, did you have a question for Jahan before we go?
Well, we may not have time to cover all. Hi, Jahan.
Hey there.
Hey there. It's good to see you. So, I feel like my life has changed tremendously since I had incredible experience, psychedelic experience with you, Jahan, in Jamaica. And since then, I've just felt a desire to help as many people as possible to experience this kind of transformation for themselves. And it's frustrating to be here where so many of these things are illegal. I mean, ketamine is legal, but MDMA may become legal soon. But, when you think about the bureaucratic backlog and how long it's going to take for all of these things to be legalized here, what do you see as our most efficient path forward for getting as many people on board with this unique understanding and perspective that psychedelics provide?
Yeah. So my actual response is keep moving forward in terms of whether it's legal or not. And that I'm not saying, I can't overtly say go do something legal, but in just terms of the evidence of what's happened, the underground work has been happening for decades. There's hundreds, if not thousands of guides. I mean, probably just hundreds just in the Bay Area. And I've only read of one report of anybody getting arrested. And that guy did a very small amount of time, and then he went and started micro meditations in Jamaica, right? And so it's very, 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 very unlikely, say like the DA is more concerned about people making lots of money or hurting people. We're trying to help people. I've heard teachers say like they know that this world exists, they're leaving everything just fine. And so continue things, still be careful, but it's very unlikely that anything's going to happen. There's a church that started here in Oakland, and I think the DEA raided them because they weren't paying their taxes 2 years ago. And then they fought back with the DEA because they wanted their mushrooms and their money back, So people are likely going to be okay unless you're a large organization that's making hundreds of thousands of dollars off of this or some of the sort. And I think as we, as you're saying, like change the people around us more and more, that really does mushroom out. So it really grows organically. Decriminalization in terms of natural decriminalization happened faster than any of us anticipated. I know a lot of the people that started the decrim movement here in Oakland, and they didn't think it was going to pass. They're like, we just have to start the ball rolling. And within a few months of starting and rolling, it passed. right? And that just really showed across the country, like this is possible. And over the representatives from 100 different cities in the US reached out to them and got the ball rolling too. I think there's just a huge cultural shift. You know, what's happened with marijuana, I think it's a good model. And I think this one's going to happen a lot faster. You know, these plants never should have been made illegal. And I wouldn't be surprised if the majority of the population now would be okay with it. Of course, if you have more conservative areas that are going to say no. But when you bring in a lot of the studies like, hey, this has also been helpful with vets and so on, you know, we're helping suffering here. You know, it's right. People don't really, as Michael Pollan has shared in his book, the 2018, How to Change Your Mind. He's like, I was surprised I found no opposition towards this. Nobody's opposed, not even the political parties. Everybody just wants it done safely. And so I think as long as we're moving together, step by step, doing this safely, we're not going to hit much resistance at all. We're just our own fears that we have to keep moving through.
Very encouraging. Thank you, Jahan.
And if I can throw in a couple of nuggets there as well, as you know, I see it here in Vancouver where we're located, you know, that the decriminalized nature movement is here as well. There's no, you know, the heat's not on anybody who's doing the work or the healing. It's for mass money, mass production, and not being transparent. You take a look at all the companies now that are publicly held in psychedelic research and things of that nature, that it is becoming very accepted widely, not just here in North America, but, you know, in many parts of the world. And I think as more and more research comes up and more actual cases show that this is making a difference for people's lives, how do you negate public opinion when it's working when nothing else has worked? And I think, you know, you said it very well, Jahan. You know, it's the set and setting, and it's the safety for, you know, everybody involved, because there's many different levels. You know, even when you're choosing a practitioner, you got to choose a safe practitioner. You know, you've got to have safe medicine and set and setting. So I think you really said it great there, and we see it here in, you know, Canada. This is now legal federally, so we're seeing these movements happening faster and faster, and literally, what I can say locally here, no resistance from law enforcement or anything of that nature. It's actually well received, because we have such a huge opiate crisis in the east side, and, you know, it's running rampant everywhere, that they'd rather see safe products and medicine out there. And like you talked about making nature illegal. So Dennis McKenna and I have a conversation many times, like, whoever gave man the right to make nature illegal anyways? Like, there's an element of nonsense, you know, when we look at nature as a whole, that just doesn't make sense to me, you know. But
yeah, well said.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa, and I appreciate the questions. Carlos, it's nice to have you here and be part of our live opportunity. Just something I'm experimenting with now, bringing some live studio members into our audience so that we can have some Q&A and really reach out to people, because this is about building community. And I want to thank you, Jahan, for your work and for your time and your patience with me in terms of getting this conversation going. The book is fantastic, The Psilocybin Connection, you know, Psychedelics, the Transformation of Consciousness and Evolution on the Planet. Great read, loved every page of it, and just so well done. I thank you for bringing that work out to the world for all of us to be able to read, Jahan. Thank you.
Thank you. It's such an honor. Thank you guys all for reading and spending time with us, and for coming. Thank you.
Yes.
All right. Well, until next time, you have been watching Spirit Plant Medicine presenting the Psilocybin Connection. We will see you again in the near future. And if you're listening to this on the radio, 100.5 FM, CFRO Co-op Radio in Vancouver. And thank you for being part of the Conscious Living